So this one, Steve, is really a development infrastructure and really, and Chris, from your standpoint, it's a time and money budgeting thing. How do I balance out solving today's immediate problem with, so somebody comes and they have this immediate problem and you could program a solution, in 40 hours. But you also know that it's the tip of a much bigger iceberg, and if you go through there and you create the infrastructure that could go solve that problem, 5 years into the future, it's more like a 500-hour project, and you aren't going to get to the value delivery for a very long time. How do you balance those out? Those are things that you come up with every single day in construction and otherwise. So how do you balance that out? And Steve, I'll start with you because you're kind of on that front line programming with your fingers on the keyboard.
Yeah. So that balance is really difficult to strike. And I will add in the other factor really is how much buy-in organizationally do you have, right? If you don't have much buy-in if your organization doesn't necessarily buy into the systems development effort or team fully, a lot of times, I wouldn't say the immediate need, today's problem, but this week or this month's problem, maybe this year, don't oversolve, right? If we solve for scalability first, the root of all evil is premature optimization. So we don't want to go too far and especially too fast before we have any buy-in. But on the flip side, always think about tomorrow. One of the things I tend to do is not only think of it like how long will my temporary solution turn permanent, because if you solve for today, that's always what happens. But, like how can my system be taken the wrong way and abused if I just solve it right now today? So if, that balance is really hard to strike. But again, if you're a new systems development group, a lot of times solve as immediate as you can get, as fast as your customers, your organization can get value out of those tools you're building, and you can start to build champions for your tools and cheerleaders for your tools. Once that happens, then you can really work to expand not only your organization's time horizon on projects, but you can expand the thinking in how we build projects on the software team. So I think that's a really personal balance to strike, and it's hard to give advice for that. But really, it's start immediate and start transitioning into more long term as your organization's view changes.
Yeah. I view it similarly, Stephen, and this is where, we had talked about DevOps, in a prior discussion. When I think about DevOps and how it works with the balance piece of this, it's looking at that immediate need, and that's where your software development team can come up with these iterative solutions, come up with them quickly. If you're balanced and you really have that development and operations working together in an IT realm, then some of the things for future-proofing, right, the scalability needs, those are already becoming best practices within the organization. So people don't worry about the fact that, gosh, I'm coming up with database standards on the fly as I'm developing these projects. Database standards are developed because those teams are working together, and the thought of scalability and the fact that it may have to go out to multiple teams in the field, and it may have to all come together, and, will that happen in a batch process? Those thoughts are spread across the team rather than having to be just with that software development team thinking about, gosh, how am I going to scale this? They've got other team members that are backing them up to be able to do that. And so that's why I'm a hugely strong proponent of development operations and them being partners with the business, because I think it gets greater understanding, and people have an understanding that is developed over time between the groups of what it takes to scale an application that would be successful. So
I think the element that I would add in is, one, make sure there's lots of communication on what the trade-offs are, and also know that just because you said it doesn't mean anybody else heard it or will remember it 4 or 5 years down the road when the system breaks. So it's a little bit like if you're building a building and you've got to go value engineer, and you go and you change out the floor coverings or something to something that's a little bit more cost effective during the construction process, but 5 years down the road they're looking pretty worn, and it's just because and nobody's going to remember that. Right? No, most likely they're going to go back and blame the manufacturer, blame the contractor, blame whoever, even though they were there. They went through the value engineering meeting, everybody signed off on it. Just know that there's that human nature. I do it all the time. I know internally, so definitely externally it occurs.